Thank you very much, Sam. Yeah, so I'm Nick. I currently work for Taylor and Francis, the scholarly publisher. But for quick background, sort of for the 3 years before that, I started investigating research fraud things in my spare time. By chance, because I was looking at Twitter while trying to avoid writing my thesis. And it sort of spiraled from there. And I ended up finding a lot, some of the things I will be sharing with you now. And yeah, have since left academia and now work for Taylor and Francis. A quick disclaimer, I'm employed by Taylor and Francis as a research integrity manager. Everything you're about to see is or was at the time, it may have been deleted, but publicly available information. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about, James has already mentioned this. Oh, something else I should mention, the Nick that James kept mentioning and Ian kept mentioning was not me. So that is Nick Brown, who I think is speaking at a later day, but I am not that Nick. Anyway, yeah, so recent mass retractions, the scientific paper as a product, what's a paper mill, and some of these things will be mentioned, and we'll go through some examples of paper mills and think about what we can do, and then we'll summarize. So, yeah, James already mentioned Hindawi, which is the largest sort of mass retraction of recent years. However, there have also been several others of sort of hundreds of papers happening at once. And so, yeah, what has caused those? Why have there been? Is it just there were lots of individual papers that happen to have problems that are really unrelated to each other, or is there actually something bigger sort of sitting behind those? So what we need to think about or talk about is thinking about the scientific paper as a product. Okay, so as you either are aware or may soon be aware that papers and citations are the currency of academia. You need them to get a job, for promotion, to get funding. It looks good in your CV. People worry about their H index, and all these sorts of things. And that means having more is better, and that means they are valuable. If you can have more papers, you're more likely to get that grant, you're more likely to get promoted, to get that job. So because of that, there are then organizations, groups, companies, various levels of sort of, in terms of actually how structurally organized they are, but have sprung into existence in order to provide papers and citations to people who need them or want them. Okay, so, and these are often called paper mills. So an organization called United to Act, who is sort of a inter-publisher industry group, who try and come up with common guidelines and things like that for publishers that everyone can see and everyone can follow. Define a paper mill as organizations or individuals that aim to profit from the creation, sale, peer review, and/or citation of manuscripts at scale, which contain low value or fraudulent content and/or authorship with the aim of publication in scholarly journals. Okay. So these are organizations or groups that are creating papers in some way, right? That could be in all sorts of ways. But these papers are not being created because they found something or because they've done some interesting research or they want to, it's the paper is being created so that there is a paper. And then quite possibly the people who created it are then not even named on the paper. They are selling that paper as a product to someone who can put their name on it so that if it is published or when it is published, that person has another line on their CV saying, I have published a paper. Obviously, that is not how scientific publishing is supposed to work. Right? That is not how science and dissemination of science is supposed to work. So see, if you are an organization or a company that is producing scientific papers for profit, you need customers. Right? It's true that there are lots of people who are pushed or want more papers. How do you connect with them? How do you let them know that you exist so they can come and pay you money? So you go where people are. So you could go to Telegram, right? So this is a screenshot from my Telegram. So these are all paper-mill Telegram channels. Right? And we can see from the array of languages there that they are in Iraq and Iran and India and Uzbekistan. And different countries prefer different different social media, right? And therefore, the paper mills in those countries go to the places where their customers, their likely customers, are going to be. So you can see there's all sorts of calls for papers, titles of papers, and there's also one at the bottom there, citation booster, right? So it's not just the paper that itself. You may already have published some papers, and they could be good, they could be great papers, right? But you want more citations for those papers. Yes.
This all of this going on, it's not fair. So how was it ensured that it's fair and you can find the people won't be?
I suppose bluntly, it's not. Right, as in this does happen and people get away with it. I would say certainly starting from a particular person with their papers and going. I suppose the way you find that, you would interview them about that paper and try and ask for their involvement in it and things, right? And it should become clear that they've no idea what it's about, right? Depending on how outrageous they have been with the paper they've chosen to purchase authorship of, you could be more tactical and buy something which is relevant to your research area. But what we will see is that if you have an advert, if you get going this sort of the other way, if you find an advert with a named title, you can find the published paper. But if you just given someone's CV and trying to prove that they hadn't paid for any of those things, that all of the citations are genuine, that they did the work they said to do, is Oh no, it's not fair at all. No, I say this is not an endorsement, right? This is not fair in the slightest, right? So, and equally, any of you, now these are all from Facebook, right? So there are loads of, if you just go on Facebook and type in Scopus, which is a popular or a widely used just list of journals, or if you type in co-author, there are dozens of Facebook groups where this, the buying and selling of authorship of papers, production of papers is arranged. And you can see that some of them have got hardly any members and some of them have got 200,000 members and 10 posts a day, right? So this is very easy to find. And it also happens on LinkedIn, which is really bold, I think. People doing this using their own LinkedIn profile. Yeah, so it's easy to find, right? And when you choose to pick a social, Instagram, if you use the right search terms, but I mean like Scopus, co-author, papers, you will find things. Okay. So here is the Macola. They're on the. Oh no, I want that. Yeah, Macola. So that is an Uzbek run, at least based, paper mill Telegram channel. So here are two adverts from November. or 2 papers. And we can see, yes, so different paper mills choose how much information they share, right? This happens to be one which shares almost all the information, which is very helpful for me. But we can see, they've, so on the left here, it says change title. So probably it's quite possible that they've submitted this paper actually once before, it's been rejected, and now they need to sort of tweak the title to submit it again. So that's one possibility. They've got the abstract, they've got the keywords there, they're telling you the journal they're planning to send it to, and we've got an author, second authorship is available, and there's a $500 discount they're saying on the original $1,100 price. Right? Now that's a Q1 journal. I mean, you may be, if you're undergrad, maybe so journals are ranked, right, in terms of their impact factor, which all comes from how many citations are the papers in that journal getting. And if a journal is publishing papers which are attracting a lot of attention, getting lots of citations, it's sort of assume that correlates with that work is very impactful. And so we're going to say that that's sort of a top tier journal. But they're a journal, and there are Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Yes. Yes. And do nothing. Yeah. That is literally. And they said, yeah. So the journal on the right here, we have one that was going to Taylor and Francis, my employer. And here they said there were going to be 5 authors. 2 of them were already booked, but those 3 positions are available. And they've decided, again, it's sort of supply and demand, market setting the price. This is not as desirable a journal. So only $300 to be first author here. And really only, if you can afford $290, you may as well go for $300. Why not go for first author, right? But so we have a lot of information here for these 2 papers. So those are sort of 2 example adverts. So this is now more in-depth look at a paper mill. So about this time last year, I think it was, I was made aware of a Telegram channel called HiQ. And at the time I joined it, there were only 15 other people in the Telegram channel. And they also had a WhatsApp group. And so you can see the beginning of the transcript of the WhatsApp there as well. And you can see what they're offering. They're saying high quality research papers, and each of those sort of abbreviations is sort of a ranking list of journals. These exist because sort of I could just create a website, call it Nick's Journal, right, and try and charge people $1,000 with a publication fee, right? But why should anyone can start their own journal? So which ones should you trust, and what which ones should be included in sort of citation indices? Because what I could do is I could also cite all of your papers in loads of journals in papers in my journal and give you all enormous H indexes, right? This manipulation could happen, right? So decisions are made on which journals do we include as sort of that are reputable or that are good, right? And so each of these acronyms is one such list that they use, right? So that's just what they're saying is these aren't just a journal that's actually just my personal website. These are real, Elsevier, Springer, Taylor and Francis, proper journals. And they're promising rapid publication. Yeah, you're going to be a co-author, and payment after acceptance. So this could all be a scam. I mean, sort of, it's a scam as I'm describing it for science and for all of us, but it could be a scam for the person sending the money, right? If I say, oh yeah, pay me $1,000, you can be an author, and I just take your money, and then, right, are you going to go to the police? Be like, yeah, I tried to buy my way into a scientific paper, but I mean, it's actually not a crime, right? But you're probably still just going to be too embarrassed to do anything. But they are promising payment after acceptance. So that's good if you are a potential customer. And so again, these are these sorts of adverts they are sharing. Again, we see the title of the paper, the intended journal, they're giving us all this information about sort of indexing. It's in Web of Science. It's a Q1. It's a top journal in Scopus. 6.7 impact factor, that fairly high. Second position, $800. Third, $700. And they're also saying, that the paper status is revised. Right? So this is, again, it's more efficient for the paper mill if, rather than selling all the authorships beforehand, getting the author list and then submitting the paper immediately, or submitting the paper, so it could just be desk rejected if the quality is low, right? And now they have to go back to the author, and all this time the customers are going to wait longer and longer for publication. So to keep the customers happy, it's more efficient if they submit possibly to many journals. They could be getting rejections, and that's fine. Then once one of them, comes back with yes, and here's your minor revisions, then they place the advert. Then they try and add more authors to that paper with minor revisions request. And now the time between an author sort of coming on due to the advert and the publication is much, much shorter. And they're almost guaranteed, if you've got a paper with minor revisions, you're probably going to be able to make those revisions and get the paper published, right? So there's a much higher chance that the customer's going to get what they want and quickly. So that's the sort of stuff for the benefit of the customer. And again, we see exactly the same thing on the right-hand side as well. Another paper, revised, different journal, high impact factor, positions for several $100s. And here they both are, right? So these were both published, right? Elsevier does a thing where if a paper is published online, like accepted version online, that doesn't count as published until it's assigned an issue number and pages. And so if they remove it from the internet before it's been assigned an issue number, it's not called retracted, it's called withdrawn. But this has basically been retracted. And on the right did actually get an issue number and things, and so that has been retracted. But both of those papers, again, with these $200, $800, are those two papers. And we can also see some repeated names here on both of these. Also quite a lot, this is an engineering, different field, I think, to everyone here, but that's still quite a lot of authors for this sort of paper. And so if we look at the retraction notice, one of them, they added 8 authors at the initial review, right? So when the advert says, at revision stage, they then sold 8 more author positions, took in a few $1,000s, or they will have done because the paper was accepted, added those 8 authors. And in addition, there were unrelated citations. So as we'll see also later, every paper has a references section. That's sort of prime real estate, right? Because when I'm submitting this possibly fraudulent paper, there's also value in being someone else who sort of is not an author of the paper, right? But in being referenced in that paper. So if they can pay, and the going rate for that is far lower, that's sort of like $10 a citation. They can pay and be cited in the paper, and now their H index is going up. Okay, so in total, so I became aware of this about halfway through last year, and by November, I sort of told everyone in terms of the publishers. By that point, they posted 24 adverts. 13 of them got successfully published, so just over 50% sort of success rate. For whatever reason, and I do not know why, but this group of people really preferred Elsevier as their target of choice. The adverts that were unsuccessfly published were also to Elsevier journals. It's not just that Elsevier were the suckers or something, right? They sent 24 of these basically. They sent 23 adverts for Elsevier journals, 1 for MDPI, and 12 of them got published. Every single time, the authors are added at revision stage. And so far, 9 of them have been retracted, which isn't too bad in about 6 months, a bit more now, but from being notified and getting these done. So I think that's one. Every paper mill operates differently in the same way that every company operates a bit differently. Yes. Yeah. So a retraction is a paper's been published, and then for all sorts of reasons, but it's then taken down. Normally, with retracted, the paper, the PDF now, the copy is still online. There's a record of what was in the paper and who the authors were of the paper. So in this case, it's because I sent the adverts for the papers to the publisher and said these people have bought the authorship and they've retracted them. But I mean, it could be data problems, as previous speakers have talked about. Could be all sorts of but in this case, it's the authorship is not genuine. It's the primary reason for all of these. But in the same way that every company has its different ways of operating, and specialities. All of this paper mill did engineering, civil engineering style papers, because that was the background of some of the people who were doing this. They knew what they were talking about enough to produce a credible looking engineering paper. Well, I would say typically, currently, no, as in that doesn't happen. Well, for one thing, there's no notification. Their employer has to know, first of all. Oh, that's entirely up to their employer. I mean, I'm okay. No, very likely not. Not if if a paper cites or refers to a paper that when at the moment they cited it, like it wasn't retracted, they had no reason to know, and then later on the paper's withdrawn or retracted, then I don't think it'd be very unlikely that I mean lots of people, so many papers cite work that for one reason or another is later retracted. It's good to know, right? It depends if you're just going, the typical lazy introduction statement of there is much recent work on, right? And you put 5 papers in, right? If one of those is retracted, it's like, right? But if it's like the foundation, what we are building on for this work is this paper, and then that's retracted, then that's a much bigger problem, right? But yeah, totally depends. Okay, so second example, paper mill. Very different way of working. So James has actually already introduced Hindawi, the mass retractions of over 10,000 papers at Hindawi. Here is a bit of behind the scenes. I mean, it's all public, but it's still behind the scenes of how that happened, how those papers came to exist. Okay? So by focusing on just one special issue, which I think is the one that James was talking about when he was like, there was one special issue with 62 papers. I think it's this one. With the great title, AI-driven wireless energy harvesting and massive IoT flight stream done. So this has 62 papers, right? The special issue, wireless energy, AI-driven. There's 62 papers. Only 2 of the titles mention wireless or energy, which is, so you didn't have to, but it's surprising on a special issue on exactly that topic that it's not covered. Right? Papers that are in the special issue include analysis model of the guiding role of national sportsmanship on the consumer market of table tennis and related IoT applications. and evaluation methods of the metacognitive ability of Chinese reading teaching for junior middle school students based on Dijkstra algorithm and IoT applications. Those are two papers that were published in this special issue, which is weird, right? They are completely irrelevant, and even on their own, those look like pretty incomprehensible titles for papers. It almost looks like someone has taken a paper on something totally different and then shoved and IoT applications on the end of the title to make it look at a glance relevant to this special issue. Again, I said about how references are, again, the references section of every paper is some real estate. I went through all the 62 papers in the special issue, and 139 of them across all 62 were to the benefit of one person, which is, again, unusual. And these papers are on all sorts of different topics and nothing to do with his work. We'll come back to him. So this special issue had 3 guest editors, which is that's not unusual. But of the 62, 60 papers were dealt with by one of the editors, 2 by another, and none by the 3rd editor, which doesn't seem like a great distribution of labor. And of the 62 papers, if you look at the corresponding email address for the corresponding author, only 4 of them did the email match the affiliation of the author, and 58 used the email address of a provincial Chinese university, all with 1940, 4 random numbers at masu.edu.cn. And you can see they're nearly, they're nearly sequential. And nearly, again, some of the titles available. And, well, where do you go? So it's looking a lot like this special issue came into existence for whatever reason, but then one of the guest editors, probably the one who's saying that they're in charge of all the things, is accepting anything because none of them are on topic, and there is a common source for all, or at least 58 of these papers, in that they're all using the same email address of a university that none of the authors attend. Right? And all of those email addresses appear to have been bought as part of one big block of email addresses, because you can buy academic email addresses online, right? You can, so if you're thinking, well, if I want to just make sure that, I just won't I won't let someone use Gmail or Yahoo, which itself is a problem, but I'll assume that every university has institutional email addresses, and then I'll insist that authors only submit from an institutional address. Well, you can buy institutional addresses. And you get some fun things. So in this paper, was in another Hindawi special issue, and some of you may be aware that Clermont-Ferrand is the name of a town in France. That's not a person. That's the name of a city in France. And their affiliation is giving us a secondary school in Burundi, but email addresses for that school can be bought from this website. Because authors are also invented for. It's very useful if you have a few non-existent people that you can call upon. Maybe you could get them to peer review your paper. Maybe, as we shall see, they could be an editor. So on Facebook, again, where we've seen that authorships and papers are bought, sold, offered, discussed, there are employees of, in this case, a Chinese paper mill who had this Facebook profile no longer exists. He has deleted it. But they have lots of Facebook friends, and they will post as a status something like "call for a reviewer," and so they know that for a reviewer to be taken seriously, they are going to need an institutional email address and to have some sort of publication record. Most publishers do now check that even if an author suggests a reviewer, that person sort of has a record, has published papers, is in the right field. And then ask for all their details. They're also asking, so not all paper mills sort of generate the paper themselves from scratch. Right? If you've written a paper and want $1,000, right, you could say, I've written a paper, and if you can find someone who will pay me $1,000, they can be first author and I'll be second author. Given that there are so many journals charge several $1,000s for publication fees, many people around the world do not have several $1,000s to publish their one paper. They may have no funding whatsoever, right, to do their PhD or postdoc. And so it's a very attractive proposition if the only way you can get your paper published is to sell the first or second authorship. If that's the only way you can get it done, then I have a lot of sympathy with someone who needs a paper to get their PhD, to move on with their academic career. You can see how it happens. Right? So they're asking for, do you have papers? We can make money together. I'll find you authors. And finally, we have, does anyone want to be an editor of a special issue? Right. So they need 2 people to be editor of a special issue. Again, you have to have published quite a bit online, some quality papers. They've got preferred areas because they've got an idea of where they want the special issue to go. But yeah, get in contact with them, and then they'll sort of special issue out. And this is the company they work for, right? And again, their website I think is still online. It's definitely on the Wayback Machine. They claim to have more than 120 first-hand core journals. So what they mean there is they're not a publisher. They have journals with editors who are collaborating with them, is their claim. And on the website, they have a big table of all the journals they claim are collaborating with them, or at least have an editor who is collaborating with them. And yeah, these are supposedly good journals, right? Whereas, again, wonderfully, my own employer there. Right? So here is another post, right, by the same Chinese paper mill employee, where they call for 100 papers into their special issue that they are advertising here. It's the Hindawi one. And the editors for the special issue, we have a lead editor and we have 2 guest editors, one of whom is someone called Marvin White, who is at the Southern University of Louisiana, USA. His email address is Marvin Webb, which is a bit weird. And I'm fairly sure it doesn't exist. Right? His only contribution to the world, pretty much, is that he has 3 retracted papers now in Hindawi special issues. One of them edited by the guy we saw earlier who had 100-odd references in another special issue. But he does also have this +1 paper, where, again, he is the last author there. But it was retracted in January because they're fairly sure also that Marvin White doesn't exist. Okay. They contacted the university. They said, we've never had anyone here. And he claims to work for a department that we don't have. Also, the article was plagiarized. Sort of tick many boxes here. The best, for me, thing that this Chinese paper mill employee shared was, if you're an editor, if you have some power as an editor of a journal, or you are an editor of a journal, why would you agree to collaborate with this Chinese paper mill guy? Hey, okay, he's promising money, but why should you believe that he will give you money? Again, how is this not a scam? Why should you trust him? Why should you trust that he ever makes any payments, or is he just going to get you to accept some papers and then you just never hear from him again? Right? And so this man shared a PDF with a lot of evidence, a lot of proof to try and convince potential editors to collaborate with him. And one of the things he shared was a load of screenshots of bank transfers. So each one of these is a payment that has been made to someone for the acceptance of a paper. about $1,000 ago. You can quickly, some of these Hindawi special issues had 250 papers in them. And people are editors of multiple special issues. If you're being paid $1,000 a paper, and I'm thinking about academic salaries in the UK, let alone in other parts of the world, you can see why this might be attractive as a thing to do. Who could this bank transfer be to? Right? An M. Zam, maybe, in Jordan. So this guy is, unsurprisingly, if in a special issue that you maybe help organize or are related to, you can get 139 references. His papers are very highly cited. So he was named as one of the top 2% researchers in the world for several years running until the people who make the citation index realized what was going on and removed him. I think last year they removed a third, like a quarter of all the people who just on the numbers, you'd say these are very highly cited people. But then when they actually looked at, okay, and how realistic is this? How, who is gaming the system, do we think? They removed something like a quarter of the people. So that is 2 paper mills in different parts of the world, operating in different ways. So one used, submitting pretty good-looking papers, and the editors, I don't believe, were involved whatsoever, as in the editors were conned. Right? They accepted those papers honestly, believing that they were good enough. Right? Second case, the editors almost certainly were taking some sort of payment in return for publishing those papers. And the special issues were organized purely for the point of stuffing them full of papers which other people have paid for. So going back to sort of authorship and authorship for sale, the Taylor and Francis author criteria, what qualifies someone to be an author? Right? You've made a significant contribution to the work reported, which could be in various ways, but you should have made some significant contribution. You've written bits of it, or helped revise it or review it, or you've really given something to the text. You agreed that the article should be submitted, and you agree with where it should go. And reviewed and agreed on all versions. You weren't just involved right at the beginning, and now you've left or not bothered with it at all. And you agree to take responsibility and accountability for the contents of the article. Just because you were only involved in some little bit, you are agreeing to be accountable for the whole thing. Yes.
Which I don't know whether they're legitimate or not in terms of who wrote it, but whether there's weight to it. I've done research wrong, etc. And I don't want my work to have work that's not,
as in the things you want to read or reference or. Well, so you can't tell, right? As in, not just suddenly if someone's just stuck their name on, right? You can judge the paper by its contents, right? So you can certainly, anything you're really going to use, read the contents and try and assess the quality of it. But you still can't know just from reading the paper whether the people whose names are at the top, how much they actually gave to it or contributed to it.
I can't explain it.
No, I understand. I think it's probably reading the papers you're referencing, always good practice. Not enough people do, at least into, you know, but yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if that's the only paper ever in that field, and normally they do something completely different, you know, that's odd, right? That's not so, you know, like, well, why is that? But in sort of doesn't, in terms of like making sure your work is based on good stuff, in some ways the author, you know, it's the content of the paper that is the important thing, and not the name at the top. Okay. Okay, so as we've already discussed this really, but you know, what stops authorship being sold? Sort of nothing, right? There is no. So again, this is all on Facebook. This is from a few years ago now. So this guy Salim Khalil, you can go to his public Facebook page. He has now changed the style of his adverts, but he is still every week or so putting out a new advert for authorship of papers. So yeah. And again, is this just a scam? No. Right, so that was maybe a bit quick, but like, title, conductive gels, properties and applications, nano-electronic. Here it is. Now, one thing you can tell, I mean, so I guess to your question about how could you tell that the authorship is legitimate or not? If we look at the affiliations of all of the authors, which again is this paper on nanoelectronics, we have Economics University, Banking University, Vietnam Business Administration, Department of Air Conditioning and Refrigeration, Institute of Pharmacy. They're also all in different countries. Sorry? Yes, yeah, exactly. There's a dental institute. Every single author is pretty much in a different country at a different department of a university. Right? Yes? Well, apparently no. And I would say also there is this, as Ian was saying, you have to think that it's possible first. If you don't think that fraud is possible or even error is possible, you're probably, unless it's really staring you in the face, you're not going to look for it. You're not. If you choose not, you know, how many people are looking at the affiliations of a paper as opposed to the abstract, the figures or something? Right? If you've only, and again, if you've only got a few minutes or something to decide whether you reject this or pass it on to peer review, this is not top of anyone's list unless you tell people that you should do this. Or like, I just managed to smack the keyboard there. Right. Yeah, then people won't look for it. Yes. Sorry.
Email address. I mean, the people who buy the email online address, they are not from the institute or university. Otherwise, they have their own like email address. So, what's the point that they buy the articles for themselves?
Well, so with the email addresses, so first, I mean, lots of academic institutions do not provide certainly their students, say postgrads or people, with institutional email addresses, right? So maybe the staff, you know, if you're a lecturer or professor, you might get an institutional email address, but there's plenty of institutions around the world where if you're a PhD student or a postdoc, you have to use a personal email address that you come up with, which is another reason why insisting on institutional email addresses is not a good idea. But the example I showed of all those email addresses from the same was because a paper mill, basically, the paper mill was doing all the admin as well. Right? So they want, when you're buying that a spot on the paper, you're not the one emailing Hindawi and the editor and dealing with the peer reviews. Like, the paper mill has bought this big block of email addresses. They take the next one off the list and sort of assign it to whoever's the corresponding author for that paper. And then the journal will communicate with that email address. And the paper mill's doing all the emailing. The names on that paper, they're not just not doing the work, they're also not doing the admin, right? They never have to do a single thing.
And I have another question. So what if they get caught? So what's the consequences like?
I mean, maybe nothing. Well, it would be up to every different institute, first of all, to know. Authors aren't going to tell their boss or their employer if they got a paper retracted. For lots of so a big driver, and almost certainly for that Chinese paper mill, is that many Chinese institutions used to, some still do, and other countries in the world also require this, that PhD students have 1, maybe 3, maybe even 5 publications in order to get their PhD. Right? You cannot graduate if you do not have those publications. And even master's students might need 1 publication to get their masters. So again, that creates an enormous incentive for people, who their master's project hasn't worked very well, or something, they've written the thesis, but is it publishable?
So they will not be banned from their career path if they get caught.
I mean, I don't know. I've never read a story. I was really interested for someone, do some digging on this or try and find someone to interview. Then you've got to find people who are willing to admit that they did do this.
Does it happen to kings?
Sorry?
Does it happen to kings?
Oh, that I do not know. We can look that up afterwards.
Just to consider time, I think it's safe to say that there is no standard universal response to this issue. And as Nick said, it is very much dependent on the institutions. One thing that makes this a particularly intractable problem is that often the retraction notices, which inform the public of why a paper was retracted, can be quite uninformative. So they can be as vague as saying issues were raised that we now view this as unsafe, which doesn't really tell much information. Others are more descriptive. So to try and identify accountability or institutions to react to the available information can be quite tricky for them. Or it might be that the retraction comes many, many years after the paper was published, at which point somebody has already established themselves with legitimate papers. So 1 or 2 retractions may be cushioned by the fact that they have this other body of work that is legitimate. But every case is very, very different. You can have some people that have pretty much all of their CV is faked, others not so much.
So many papers have multiple authors.
Yeah.
Even there's no way at all for even the publisher, but for anyone to know, if a bit of the paper is fake, even provably fake, who did, which author is responsible. I mean, I said the authorship criteria sort of everyone should be held accountable for the content of the paper, but it probably was most likely one person chose to fake something. So even if you have a paper retracted, it's very easy for people to say, well, that was, normally it is the lead professor throws the postdoc under the bus, is the way it tends to go. But it's very easy to say, oh, that wasn't me. It was this person who also has since left academia.
Thank you so much.
So we'll keep the show going.
Okay.
For Nick to finish.
Yeah,
and then we'll play with the question.
So here is another paper, again, another example. Now something particularly to do with water removing of toxic dyes and some sort of physical chemistry or something going on there. Again, retracted, and again, authorship from all over the world, different, civil engineering, medical, economic security, medical instrumentation techniques. I think particularly part of this one, So KU is at that Economic Security Department in Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And they supposedly performed the scanning electron microscopy, X-ray diffraction, and what's that, beta emission tomography, which I don't think many economics departments have in preps. So sort of, but this is in the one thing that journals have tried to do to try and sort of get some accountability for who did what is introduce these author contribution statements. But obviously you can just lie, right? You can just make up what's in those. So they don't really prevent anything. And just to say, yeah, I mean, said is big business, right? These are millions of dollars industry across the world. Yeah, one special issue could have 200 papers, and maybe $1,000, sorry, has been sort of paid to get those published. But obviously that's the cut we saw going to an editor. But the paper was going to charge, you know, plenty more than that to the client. And this was on Indeed. A paper mill, well, sorry, a scientific paper publishing company. They want a writer, and $10,000 to $30,000 a month is the claimed advertised salary. So what can we do? I mean, most of this stuff is coming from, I mean, almost all of it is coming from stupid incentives. Very few people would do this for the glory, right? Because this is not faking your data, right? There will always be people who will choose to sort of say that there'll be glory associated with curing Alzheimer's or solving superconductivity or something, right? But that's none of it. None of this is sort of incredibly high level work. This is people who need papers. So if we remove that push, then a massive chunk of this will go away. Be vigilant for abuse. So, you know, if you are asked to peer review a paper, if you are an editor, yeah, there's some things you do not even, I mean, if you're asked for those things, you will be probably a domain expert in what you're looking at. But you don't need to be an expert to see that people from completely different institutions, obviously it depends on the research, but you know, may not be all collaborating together to produce this work. And yeah, improve editorial processes. Again, some of these things should not have made it through. They should not have been sent for peer review. They should have just been desk rejected. It shouldn't be easy to add 8 authors to a paper at first revision stage. And it has been mentioned today, but yeah, if you find something in a published paper, you can report the issue on PubPeer. If you're almost less confident or less comfortable doing that, depending on what you feel, you can also contact the journal and say, I found this and I think this is weird. You don't have to be certain, right? You know, they will assess it, and then and if they think you're wrong or something, then that's okay. They're not going to hold it against you forever or something like that. And you can also report it to institutions, though I would say of all the things, they are the least likely to respond, as various people have said. But fixing this requires everyone. It requires institutions, publishers, funders, governmental bodies, academia, all of you here. So yeah, in summary, publishing fraud is sadly prolific and very profitable. Fake papers are produced on an industrial scale. We need systematic change to remove the incentives. And a massive cleanup of literature for everything that's already published is required. And on that optimistic note, thank you for listening. Any more questions?
Brilliant. Is it true that you had a Twitter handle which was author for sale? Was it?
Yes.
But the purpose of that was to just retweet bonkers adverts you'd seen?
Yeah. So
or was it
one of the tricky things, even with you see an advert published, which says, you know, this paper will be in this journal. It costs $1,000 to be first author. and you find the paper. I could have photoshopped that, right? I could pick someone I don't like and just make adverts for their papers and send and try and, ruin their career. So why should someone almost trust that I haven't done that? And the other thing is authors would certainly once, to begin with, I think no one thought that anyone would ever look at these adverts or care, anyone who wasn't a client sort of thing. And so there were adverts that stayed up for 2-3 years, and then I found the paper. But once you know people are checking, the people posting these adverts, as soon as they'd sold the stuff, would then delete the advert, which is sensible, right? If you're them. But so I wanted a way of being able to timestamp the adverts and create an archive. And also, Twitter had the bonus of also some publicity of raising awareness of the problem. So it sort of did all those three things. So whenever I found an advert, I would take a screenshot, tweet it out, and then if 6 months later the paper was published, I could go to that tweet and sort of no one could claim that I'd just created the advert to spite the authors. So it's that Twitter account still exists, but it's no longer posting to Twitter. But it now exists on Blue Sky, and it's on Blue Sky whenever I find some adverts.
And is it true that I think Dorothy said that, but people didn't quite get it, and they were contacting you as if you were selling the service of being an author? Is that made up? I don't know.
Oh yeah. So I got some DMs on Twitter from people saying how much, or like, can I contact you? Or I'd post an advert about a computer science paper, and someone would message me going, "Have you got anything for civil engineering?"
Yeah. Are there any publishing like journals that are actively doing anything to try and safeguard against this? I think particularly when you were talking about some of the repeat offenders, and it's so I work in an online pharmacy, and there's a dev team that are constantly kind of trying to figure out ways to flag up duplicate accounts where someone's been blocked from an order and they just make a new fake one. And I constantly come across kinds of things that are really, really, really obvious. And I think about the things that they are coding into algorithms that could be used to just instantly flag these up to save people time to deal with the more complicated and grey areas when there's stuff that's really obviously fake.
So it's a tricky one. I think no publisher. I guess I know what we do at Turner and Francis. I don't know what happens behind the scenes of anyone else, but I think no publisher is having a ban list, right? Of like, you can never darken that door ever again, right? If someone has done something once, or even been on a paper that's done something once, I don't think it's right that you'd be like, well, you can never publish this ever again in your whole career, sort of thing. Oh yeah. Things get looked into a lot, yes. And accounts. I mean, yeah, there are people with multiple accounts. But they can always just create another one, right, as I'm sure. Right. There are publishers. There's another publisher like industry body called STM, but that most major publishers are sort of signed up to, sort of pay into, and they create some tools, some like common tools that can be used by every publisher. And there are things, you can put a submission in, it'll sort of say about like IP addresses, or like our submission system says where the IP address is, for example. So if there's like an enormous mismatch on things, or if the same IP address, which is like a small town somewhere without a university, keeps being the submission IP for people all over the world, supposedly, like on the affiliation, right? That's a flag. That's like, well, what's going on there? So yeah, people get timed out, say, from the submission system if they're trying to submit loads of papers a day, or over some time period. Accounts can be banned, or email addresses, but you can always make another email address. You can always make another account. So it's a sort of a never-ending fight. When you say so.
That have just complete, like, absurd stuff in it.
Well, the special issue, yeah. I mean, so well, you know, Wiley closed that journal. They've folded the entire business of Hindawi. So I'd say I'm sure that things are happening very differently in all of those journals now.
Okay. Oh, Angelica, you can have the last. You can have the last question, and then we'll go to Reese, who's patiently waiting.
Thank you. This is very interesting. I had a question before. I think you may have half answered it already, but I've noticed that, you know, I guess as a researcher over time, you're accumulating citations from you cannot control who. And I noticed that one of my citations was like a really, really weird source. Like it had nothing to do with the article that it was citing. So, and I'm pretty sure, like, just from, you know, looking at title and abstract and my work that was cited, that this is really fishy and probably paper mill territory. What would you suggest I, as someone who is not like usually very like I don't like actively look for fraud in scientific papers as the major part of my research. What should I do? Is there anything like simple that I can do in that case?
So I'd say it depends on the. I think the person to go to, or the thing would be to go to the publisher, right? But also consider, I guess, is the publisher reputable? Right? If there are, even on some of these lists which are sort of used for calculating H-index and stuff, you know, the very bottom of that or something, you know, there'll be some publishers which you're not likely to ever get a response on. They're not likely to take any action whatsoever. But if it is on sort of a reputable publisher, then I would go to them. So most publishers do now have sort of an ethics@publisher.co.uk or .com sort of like inbox. And just with, you know, I just received a citation from this paper of my paper. There's nothing to do with them. I have no idea why they've cited it. I just, you know, I think that's odd, sort of thing. And then someone will have a look. But I mean, yeah, I don't think there's anything more you sort of, I guess you could, I mean, you could try emailing the authors, but I wouldn't hold your breath for a response normally.